as well. And let me pull up the docs here. All right. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it over on this. This is a much bigger screen. There we go. Pull that up and then share the screen right here. All right. Go. And let me zoom in on that a bit. There's the fit. Format. Wait, where's the little zoom? There it is. That's what I was looking for. Cool. All right. What do you think, Dan? Do we have consensus? Good quorum? Okay. Cool. Well, welcome everybody to this installation of the Iceberg sync. So basically, we have a couple small things that we'll need to discuss at the end. So I'm happy to kind of go through that. So wanted to go through a couple of the highlights. Actually, you know, why don't we have one of the? I'm still kind of, I've seen a couple of these, but not all of them. So Dan or Faco, do you want to just go through the highlights and then I'll take care of the rest? Or Edward, whoever knows familiar with all of these, or do we just, you know, I don't know if we want to say different things about each feature.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm familiar with all of them. I think Edward has probably done a lot of the reviews on these. So Edward, if you want to kick it off with the Gradle version catalog and just kind of explain what that transition was. And then we can take swing it through these Antons here so he can probably describe some of the things with the adaptive split planning.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can describe some of them. So yeah, at least the one I reviewed. So yeah, right. Most recently, so thanks to Max, we have now full Gradle version catalog support. That means we don't have to use the Nebula Recommender plugin, which was quite old and didn't work with Dependabot. So nowadays, Dependabot suggests if there are library updates automatically, and if tests are passing, you know, we can just we can just merge them if everything is fine. So that's a really great improvement.
Do we have any? We used to be on Maven at one point, or we're?
No. We were on Gradle. That I don't know, but like the Gradle Nebula plugin just was not compatible with Dependabot.
Gotcha. Cool.
The other thing, yeah. So Bryan, thanks to Bryan, like he fixed an issue with Parquet, Parquet caching the codecs. I think they were only cached by name but not by level. So he fixed that, and this is really good to have. Yeah, the other thing I can talk about real quick is we now added support for Spark read metrics to the Spark UI. Thanks, Karuppayya. And that is about it. So if anyone can take the others, that would be great.
So Anton, we know you're on. Is Coney on?
Yeah, I mean, I can take a few as well.
Okay. Great.
What Edward just covered, I mean, the read metrics UI in the UI is probably like one of the really valuable things. So right now, we have the stats that are in the scan report. Now they will be shown on the Spark UI. So that would be really nice addition to the metrics framework that we have. Thanks to Coney, we now can create like a branch on an empty table. There are optimizations to DeleteFileIndex that are being done right now. Like I started profiling that and I've discovered quite a bit of inefficiencies, so we're fixing them one by one. The one PR that's referenced here is the one that fixes the repetitive conversion of min-max boundaries for delete files, because that was done features before and was dominating the overall planning time. We also did adaptive split size in Spark. So right now, if we detect that the cluster parallelism is much higher and you are not utilizing all of the slots, we can adaptively go for a smaller split size. Hopefully that the query will terminate faster. We decided not to increase the split size adaptively because that can lead to some weird consequences. For example, if you bump, like in a lot of cases it makes sense, but in general case it's not safe because it may actually cause more spill to disk, and if that happens because you have bigger tasks, so if you have to locally order them, there is a higher chance of spill, and if that happens, that dominates the runtime. So we decided not to do that. Yeah, that's about it. And yeah, and I think there are a few Python ones if Paco can cover that. That would be wonderful.
Actually, Anton, can I ask about the adaptive split planning? Because we had like a couple different versions out there. Ryan also had one that was like more in core, that was like changing how we do the split sizing as we're scanning. Was there any discussion as to like why we went with the Spark approach versus the core approach?
Both can coexist. The reason why we went for this one earlier because it's much simpler, and that's how the planning works in Spark, because you have a list of data file, list of tasks in memory. So that logic that Ryan had in core of adding another iterator and checking it just didn't make sense. But we did add like a common utility method that allows you to compute the advisory split size given the sizing and whatnot. So you can reuse that logic. So Ryan's PR still applies, but for those cases that go through the normal planning, which is not really the case in Spark because we have everything in memory and we can do a much better job and much easier in terms of what split size we need to have.
Yeah, I think that this actually targets the primary use case right now, because you know, Flink doesn't really use split planning quite the same way, and Trino does its own split planning. So I think Spark is the primary thing that we wanted to focus on. So it makes sense. I just didn't know if there was any additional context for like one versus the other.
Yeah, it's just primarily the complexity of the approaches, and given that this is the primary use case. But again, whatever we have in core still probably makes sense, but for other use cases.
Sounds good.
Shall I go with the Python ones? So in the previous sync, we had like the release of the 0.4. Already like a lot of PRs going into 0.5. One of them is the hdfs support using pyarrow. It was already more or less in there, but Luigi actually created like exposed the hdfs configuration, and also went through all the trouble of testing. So thank you for that. Also, a lot of Avro stuff is going in, like thanks to Rusty for the performance there. So I'm also thinking of maybe doing a release later this month, and then hopefully around October we can also do another release around the write support. But yeah, there's already a lot of stuff going in after the last release, so I think it's good just to also get this stuff to the public. And I think a big shout out to Jan, Renjie, and Xuanwo on working on the Rust implementation. There's a lot of action going on there, a lot of PRs, a lot of discussions. So I think that's good, and I think yeah, it's really getting there. It's takes shape, so that's really good. Thanks everyone.
Paco, I don't know if you, I mean, do you want to talk about the other thing that you're working on with another tool, or is it too early to talk about that?
You mean the Polar stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, playing around with the Polars. I still have to work a bit on the integration because there are some Polars we go from Polars to pyarrow to Iceberg, so still some stuff going on there. But yeah, hopefully we can get this support in there. That would be cool.
I think it'd be cool to just bring that up in case somebody else might be able to even like work with you on that or something, and if that would be of any help. So that's why I wanted to mention it. So I don't know when, yeah, I know there's a lot of things you're running into right now, and so maybe yeah, anybody is like a big Polars fan, maybe talk to Paco.
Yeah, maybe to clarify, so currently there's no support, so I write in Iceberg to get like initial support in there, but I think ideally want to go for Iceberg Rust, and the package is now being developed to get like a native Rust support. That would be even better, of course. So
yeah,
But at least being able to put in like data with like a pruning of the data files and stuff, everything that Iceberg offers, I think would already be like a first step. And later on, we get to go to the actual Iceberg Rust package to get like full Rust support in there.
Cool. Yeah. I've seen more people talking about folders these days in the Slack channel. So I think it's slowly gaining adoption, which is interesting. Cool. Okay, so let me see.
Before we move on, I want to make one more call out that didn't quite make the highlights, and it's kind of a combination of some work that's been done and some that's in progress. And so Bryan Keller has been working on some of the GCP related integrations. So we have GCS file IO, which has been fixed and improved. And if anybody is running on GCP, it would be great to have them set that up and use that and validate, behaviors and everything else. There's also a Python implementation for GCS support. I think that one's been out there for a little while in review, but if there's anybody who is, either involved at like Shopify, I think is where it came out of, it would be great to get that cleaned up, make sure that it's consistent with our Java implementation in terms of properties and settings, and get that through so we get a little bit better and more cohesive GCP support. There's also a what is it, big lake catalog or something like that that's under review, and I think that that'll help kind of round out the GCP ecosystem a little bit. So those are all in progress up there.
Nice. Does anybody else have any highlights maybe that we missed that you wanted to shout out? Cool. So for the release, I know there were a couple of things that we're basically waiting for various reviews. I think some are coming from Ryan maybe, and there's maybe a couple other things that we're trying to figure out, like what's going to make it in versus what's not. Dan, do you have any overview of like where we're at with any of those and what's actually holding us up versus?
Well, I think we're just kind of like seeking input in terms of like what drivers we have for a 1.4. The 1.3, like we had a lot of things stacked up and we were waiting on like the Flink 117, the Spark 3.4. Anton, do you have any blockers or anything for a 1.4 that we're trying to get out?
I think during the last thing we planned end of this month, right? As the 1.4 release, and there are a few changes that I'm aware of. One is distributed planning in Spark. That's being like reviewed, so I think it probably needs like a week or two to get into the reviewable state. So it's still on track for that date that we planned for 1.4. There are like numerous DeleteFileIndex improvements that are going in as well, and also I need to cherry pick some of the row level operations from Spark master into like Iceberg repo. So that's the changes that I'm aware of on the Spark side, but I cannot talk about like other engines.
The other bigger ones that I know of that we're trying to target for 1.4, one is the Vue implementations and the Vue REST spec. Another is the multi-table commit, which I believe is in. Edward, do we have the REST spec for the? Yeah, we have the REST spec for the multi-table commit.
Yeah, multi-table commit is all in. So.
Yeah, so those ones are already in, and then I don't know if the multi-table transaction is probably a great target for 1.4. That probably still has a lot more work to go.
Yeah, that probably will not make it into 1.4. There's still a lot of open questions, and so generally, yeah, Vue support is what we are aiming for.
Have we cut a milestone in the GitHub project for 1.4? We might want to just add that.
So, but I can do that real quick.
Yeah, that would be great.
One more change that we potentially should discuss is whether we should change the default table format version. I think there was a discussion on the dev list, and the consensus was that probably we should do it. So I wanted to raise that question again to see if anyone has any concerns. And I remind that the primary motivation is not to enable merge and read by default. That would be still under flag. But the primary reason is to get rid of some of the weird behaviors and performance issues that we have in V1, specifically around schema spec evolution. So there's now transforms that behave in a weird way, and also the snapshot ID inheritance that can really be an issue if you have a large table and then you write manifest. So are there any concerns of changing the default in 1.4?
I think it's a good idea, but we should probably just like revisit that dev list discussion, because like we don't want to make the decision here, but we probably want to see if there's any like obvious pushback, and it sounds like, you know,
And basically I'll submit a PR because we had discussion on the dev list already,
Yep.
and I'll basically send the link to the PR to that whole thread. And if there are any concerns, we can revisit it, but I'll go ahead and make the PR of this.
Cool. Any other comments on the release, or let's see. Trino has used, yeah, so Alex from the Trino community just said they've been using it for a while and they haven't had any issues, so that's good feedback there. And Dan, I believe Athena does use V2 as well, right? I think that's what Bryan was also mentioning. So cool. Okay, so yeah, anything else we should discuss about 1.4.0? Obviously, we need to bring that up as a separate issue, follow up on that, and then anything else that anybody wants to try to make as part of this release. So I'm calling now.
I think I'll start a dev list thread, collecting those points as well, and just mentioning what we already talked. And I'll be the release manager for 1.4, like we discussed last time. So
cool.
Yeah, maybe
on track.
I also create like a milestone for 1.4, so maybe it's also a nice way to track like these to get in.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Cool. And Anton, let me know if there's anything from the support side from a DevRel perspective, how I can help you with the release. I'd like to start getting somewhat involved in that to take off some of the, any of the mundane tasks for you.
Do you want to do it? And I can actually help you if whatever, right?
Yeah, I'm down. I'm totally down to start owning a bit of the release process to some degree, and then just basically doing whatever everybody's telling me to do. So, say again?
Let's do it together then.
Perfect. Great. All right. All right. Any last minute things on the release, or we can go on to the discussion? Cool. All right. So the first two are things I've been bringing up on the community side, and so I've been thinking a lot, particularly around the structuring of where code lives, as well as where documents live and everything goes. The second bullet we'll get to in a second with the documentation proposal, but it brought up when we were bringing in Rust and Go. How are we going to generically handle these newer kind of repositories that have their own individual versioning and have all their own specific kind of independent tasks going on, if you will, even though sometimes there may be some overlap with the main project. These clients can somewhat, it's very common you would see a client maybe get represented externally. And so the Rust team, the team we just mentioned on the last bullet and highlights, has been doing an excellent job, and they just they prefer to have basically their own Rust repository for various reasons, and it's been kind of, I forgot to link the discussion there, but for various reasons they've decided to go with an external one, whereas Go and Python are still in the main repository. And I think either answer is a very valid answer, but what I personally would hope to see, especially when it comes to consistency, particularly in the docs, I'm trying to align things so that things are easier to find and much more well understood. Hopefully more parallels between how we, show documentation and how we visualize a project to the structure of our actual code, right? And so, so with that, if we have consistency, it makes it easy to say, oh, you're working on a client, that's in a external client thing, or that's under this folder in the main repo. So I think my argument was, I hope we get, one way or the other. And I'm happy to kind of hear what other people think in terms of like any preferences for it, Rust, Go, and Python to be in the main Iceberg repo, or for them to be, each their own independent client projects or client repositories. Don't all jump at once. I think most people don't have a much of an opinion from what it sounds like also on the thread. But
so, I mean, Bryan, like your main question, I think, revolves around so Go, Python, and Java are all in the same repo right now, right?
yes. Yep.
And so the question really just comes down to, does it make sense, and is there like good motivation for keeping Rust separate, or should we really just like fold it in early so that we have that consistency? The discussion thread, I think, happened right around the time that we were talking about Go and Rust, and, at the same time, but they took different paths.
Sure.
Go came in, Rust stayed out.
Yeah.
And then the question being like, does it help with docs to keep them together? Is there any motivation why we would keep it one way or the other?
Hi, I'm Xuanwo from Rust team. We are open and okay to merge Rust repo in the main repo. That's okay for us. That's what you want to know.
Okay. All right. I mean, again, and this wasn't trying to say one way is right or one way is, the wrong way. I just, my personal desire is to have, either we do it, we when it comes to how we're treating clients, effectively treating them roughly or putting them in the same setup, so that when we're referring people to that, then it's clear that, oh yeah, of course that's not going to be in the main repo, or oh no, it'll be under this folder in the main repo. So I think having that level of consistency will help people, basically navigate. So again, I'm actually curious to know, like, is there a reason why you want to have it outside? And maybe let's hear what that reasoning would be, and maybe we can, consider going the other direction, at least do the thought exercise.
Yeah, our original reason to have a separate repo is for quick merge and easier CI setup.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, 'cause that's another question, right? So like having all the clients, like, so when we do versioning for documentation, when we do the versioning within a particular repo, right? If everything's in the main repo, it'll be like a very big tag or branch explosion, right? That you're gonna have to have maybe like a prefixed thing for Go, a prefixed thing for Python, a prefixed thing for Rust, and then just, maybe no prefix for regular Iceberg, and then all that kind of stuff. So that's obviously going to make, a little bit of the CI/CD elements, kind of tricky, and may also have its own complexity. So again, I think that as long as we go one way or the other and we're the same in all the client projects, I'm happy to even consider taking, Java and all the other clients out. But I just think we should start thinking about it collectively and saying, what's the lesser evil? And for me, ultimately, the docs will just be wherever the actual code is, and be versioned with the code, is how I see it. Because ideally, if you're making a code change, there should be, a docs change in the same PR. So anyways, I think that's a very valid point. Like there's going to be more complexity with the build, and if we have like everything with multiple versionings in the same repo. So that helps give anybody else like swaying anybody towards or for or against one of the two options, then speak now.
Yeah. Now for me, Python, we initially did it like inside a repo, and I think it was a good choice because it also gives like a lot of visibility, especially people who also working on the Java, they also see like the Python stuff going on. I think that was very helpful. I'm a little bit concerned also with the CI, especially when we have to do all the exclusions. They're already quite complex.
Yeah.
When I add more of them, like with Go and also with Rust, I think it also gets maybe exponentially complex, more complex. And also, so not all the tooling, they work perfectly with like this monorepo structure. So also for Python, I use like pre-commit, and it had some weird stuff in there. So yeah, maybe we should also check it out before we actually make a decision. I'm not like a Rust expert, so that's not up to me.
Yeah.
And I think also maybe we should also maybe do like a phased approach where we first do like the Java stuff. Once that's done, and for Go or for Rust, there's no documentation yet. For Python, there is documentation in the same repo.
Yeah.
So maybe we can also just do some experimentation there before we actually
make a decision one way or the other. Yeah. Okay. That sounds like a good plan. And I think, you know, just to get this out there, you know, this will go up on the YouTube. Hopefully people will listen and start thinking about what, you know, if there's some experience that they've had in previous projects doing monorepo versus the other, and if they have any good insight to give us there. Because I think, yeah, it'll be something that we'll want to collectively make, because there's just trade-offs when it comes to either approach. So, but yeah, thanks Anton. That was my main concern, is yeah, consistent one way or the other. I think either side's going to have its difficulties, and but yeah, I don't know. I have my own personal way I lean, but I'm not going to state that out loud because I want to see what everybody else thinks first. Cool. So just keep that. You know, there's already a discussion on particularly about Rust, but I can even maybe make a separate thread on the mailing list to start discussing this, you know, more holistically, of, you know, going one way or the other, and then just chime in on that if you have some opinions that you'd like to share on you know, which way we should go there. Okay, and then next thing, so I recently created yet another proposal for fixing the docs. And this time it'll be different proposal, is what I am labeling it. So I actually linked through a couple of the previous bits of work that Sam and a couple other people in the community have tried to do before. And so when I looked at what was being addressed, it was more focused on the content layout of the actual site at the end. But I think the biggest problem to me has largely come down to how easy it is to find changes you need to make in the docs when you have something going on in the code. So it seems like there's a bit of fragmentation with the documentation today. And there's also, you know, the multi-branch versioning does not seem to be like a popular option for a lot of people, because it makes the releasing super difficult, which I guess I'll experience with you here shortly, Anton. And so that, you know, so that's something that, you know, I wanted to think through, like, okay, well, how do we have a mono repo, but then avoid the reason why we went to branch, which was to avoid having, like, let's say, multiple versions of, you know, Java docs in the same repository, where you would effectively, in a GitHub search, if you searched on a class, right, you would see the class come up in every single Java doc as well, for all the different versions. So we needed a way to get rid of that, and Ryan suggested to me a possible way to address this, which would be, you know, like basically tar it up into a binary file or something like that, so that it's no longer going to get searched in plain text. And then, you know, in the build time, we would just open it up and use the Java docs to attach it, you know, at build time. So so that was, you know, the solution that I'm just currently going to go with. If anybody else has experience of, you know, again, dealing with multiple versioning strategies within a mono repo, would be happy to hear about it and know your experiences as well. So yeah, so if you want to read through my proposal, we had a couple people already kind of go through it. I'm setting up basically a proof of concept right now, and trying to just implement some of the things that we've already discussed. And we'll effectively, the goal is to get, you know, all of the documentation for at least Iceberg proper basically inside the main repo again, and having that all the different versions on the same branch. From there, all the different versions on the same branch, but then from there, try to basically devise a way that anything that is a version doc that is static resource in that branch gets hidden from the search index across IDEs and across GitHub as well, and any other thing that searches code files. I'm sure all of you have like a million AI tools now. So, okay, so that's the basic idea. And then the second phase of that, after we fix, the build and getting all the code into a structure that mirrors what we see on the website, the next part will be actually addressing kind of some of the issues that that Sam listed out, as well as a couple other people in the community. I also asked for, I built created a documentation channel on Slack. So if you have like things that are bugging you about the documentation that are just not like something that's been missing, my first goal is to make it easy to start contributing to docs when you're contributing code. My second goal is then to fix the docs that are missing because of that symptom. And so that's going to be this, and I want to follow this diataxis method. If anybody has seen this before, about how we're going to start splitting this up. Happy to go through that offline, but that's basically, if you're familiar with this, this is what I'm going to be trying to use as kind of a framework to structure the actual documentation, figure out what's missing, and so on and so forth. So anyways, so that's the proposal. Any questions or objections or curiosities there? All right.
I think it's a nice effort, but I'll need, for example, to take a look at the proposal because I haven't. But there are definitely some things that can be improved when it comes to the documentation, and also was the release process. I think I struggled a little bit last time, and so we'll see how did. Hopefully, we can make it better.
Yeah, and part of that too does talk about how fixing how we have the release process around docs. Or you're talking about the release process around docs, right? Or just the release process in general?
I mean the docs. So the release was fairly smooth, but I probably spent more time on updating
the docs. And that's exactly what this is going to fix. I think the goal is we're basically going to be merging all of the previous states of documentation into this one state, again falling into that thing that does not that binary folder or tar file, right? That kind of hides this from everything else. Have that readily available to reference the previous versions, and then but basically from then on, like we're gonna manage everything that is a versioned variation of the documentation in a single branch. And it's always just going to be like, whatever's on the main branch, we do a cut, and then whatever the documentation state was at that tag is, what it was at that tag, right? So I don't want to get into this whole like we cut this release, then we have to move this over here, then we have to make sure that we compile or update any of the previous branches of other docs. Like it's complicated, right? So so that's effectively how we're going to have one doc state, not 50, is the goal with this change as well. So please do look through it and let me know if you have any questions, Anton, and anybody else on the call here.
Hey Bryan, I just want to ask, kind of at a general level, the actual like Iceberg Apache org site is currently like a different site than the doc site, and there are even some like inconsistencies, like very subtle ones, about sometimes the drop-down menu changes depending on which one you're in.
Yep.
Is that gonna all fold under the same thing too, or are we keeping like that initial landing page separate and then the doc site is still a redirect to?
I want the doc site included there as well, mainly because anytime we have any information that talks about the state of the code, the Iceberg, which is included in the website as well, right? The general, even though that more evergreen, like whatever you have your content, more static content is not going to change as often. still, I want you to be able, when you're making a change to code and how something works, or especially when we start working on V3, right? And we have to make those like very long running changes. That should be, you know, a unit of work in a PR that is, you know, the code's changed, and now the docs have changed, and now the website has changed, and that should all ideally be the same unit of work, in my opinion. So.
Yep. No, that sounds good. I think that that's also part of some of the release problems that we had, where those two things would get a little bit out of sync, or something would get pushed to one location. And so, you know, we've had problems where it's like, hey, the version numbers are correct if you happen to be on the right version, but if you like go to a different one, it'll like point to the wrong thing, and you'll see a different set of options. And so, just getting to a single location, a single deployment, I think it helps with the consistency and the release process. So.
Yeah, and I'm actually consulting Manfred Moser from the Trino community. He worked in Maven stuff before and is really good with this like crazy versioning stuff. So if anybody has worked in this, I'm really ready to get help on what's the right setup to accomplish something like this. But I think that we pretty much have a way forward. I'm just waiting to actually get it implemented and see if it run into the wall where it doesn't work all the way that I was expecting. So, but we'll tackle it a thing at a time. I think this current plan we have should work, but famous last words. So, cool. Any last minute questions on that before we head on, and I'll hand this off to Anton to talk about his points of discussion.
Well, I have some questions about our Rust docs.
Yes.
Yeah, as you may know, Rust has its own docs generator called Rust doc. It will generate our API docs. So will this new framework cover those API docs too?
Nice. Oh, the new framework. I thought you were saying your new framework actually generated the docs. So it does generate docs, kind of like Java docs does, correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So so basically, yeah, in the same way that we would treat, you know, the Java docs as kind of like, hey, we're cutting a version of static docs. We don't want that. So let's say we all collectively decide to move Rust in the main repo, right? So we would basically cut that version of the documentation whenever we're doing the release, but we would immediately, as part of that build, would tar it up. We'd basically just put it into a binary blob file, and then that's what would actually get committed at the tag or whatever like that. So if you're searching through a tag, you're not seeing all of the generated static files. You're seeing, you're just, you know, it's just going to be like a binary blob. And then we'll effectively, whenever we're building the website on a later step, we'll untar all that. We'll untar the Java docs files and any other, you know, generated static docs, and we'll add it to the website at a later phase. That's the general idea. And again, I think it should work. It's just not 100% in my head, like the full set of steps that we're gonna have to mess with there. But and yeah, if anybody knows a lot about our current build process, like also tell me if some idea that we're throwing out there is just clearly not going to work for some reason. But I think it should work in theory.
It's true. Yeah, should work.
Yep. Any other? It was a good question. Any other last minute questions on that? Cool. Check them out. Let me know what you all think. And Anton, do you want to talk to us about 3547?
Yeah, I mean, I've added a few issues here, but mostly to raise the attention, so we don't have to like go very deep or discuss them. But the first one, the 3547, is essentially a discussion that happened a while ago. I'll explain where I'm coming from. So internally, we have some extensions for Spark create table statements, which allow you to specify the ordering of the table directly in the create table. And also the distribution, kind of similar to what you can do as clustered by in Hive or like bucketed by in Spark. Similar but different, right? But essentially, it allows you to set the Iceberg sort order from the create table statement. We find it very valuable, and we do have the alter table write command in extensions, but that doesn't really work for create table as select. And also a little bit weird for cases where you actually have to ask people to do alter table immediately after the create table. So all in all, like, I think it just makes sense for us to be able to support a sort order definition in the create table statement. And of course, I would prefer that to be a Spark feature, but that would be a very user-facing change in Spark. And most likely this would be kind of controversial, would be hard to get in. So a while ago, we discussed whether we can express that as a change to the table property. And we have a few precedents where we, once you try to change a table property, we actually act on it and we translate that. At least that happens in Spark connector. And also we have some of the precedents for the format version, for example, which happens in the core. That one I'm not sure about. So it's basically, I want to start that discussion once again, because I see there's a lot of value, like the create table as select statements, where you would express the sort order in the table definition, where you cannot really call alter table right order by after the fact. So basically, like, if you have any feedback or you have any opinion, let's probably discuss it once again, because I don't think that it would be that easy to get that change in Spark itself.
I think one of the concerns would be, and I see that there's a little bit of pushback on the PR from like Jack and Ryan for doing that. The table property approach has some issues just because depending on how you set the table property, it may or may not be respected. And so now we're starting to see more people come in and do like Python orchestration with tables. And if they think that they can set the property, but then it just like actually sets the property and nothing picks that up to, you know, alter the table behavior, you get like this weird thing where it looks like it's set, but it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And I think that that may be some of the motivation for why we're saying, hey, like this table property hack may not be the best way going forward, especially as we like have new clients and there's new libraries. Like everybody either has to implement that hack consistently, otherwise you get this weird state. I do see that like Trino, you know, supports an alternate syntax where it's like on the create statement they have like the options, and I think, you know, it's like with like sort order or something like that. So I don't know if there's some other way that we could infer it through Spark through options or something that they can set as part of the actual create statement, if that's supported. So we're still like interpreting it a little bit based on, you know, something that is not strictly defined as SQL syntax, but then it would be only through that path, and we don't have the confusion about like setting table property versus like setting something that's actually altering the metadata of the table.
Yeah, unfortunately, like we discussed multiple options what that can be done in Spark, and like there is no option support, and it's generally really hard to push some of the changes like this because it's specific to a single data source, which probably makes sense. So let's discuss and continue to discuss this a little bit more. I'm not a big fan of the table property. That's why we have those extensions internally, but I'm not sure this is the battle we want to have.
Yeah.
Overall. But it's just like really valuable feature. Let's continue discussing how to best represent that.
Is there just not a lot? Because the funny thing I'm surprised about is, you know, data frames, like if you go through that API, they actually support like options. But is there just like not a whole lot of openness to adding options like as part of the SQL definition within Spark?
Yeah, that's a separate discussion, I guess, but
Okay.
yeah, it's a long one. So there have been multiple attempts to add options to the SQL API, which, I mean, I agree. If you have options in data frame, then why not have options in SQL? But as it stands today, there is no option support, and there is like a little bit of pushback on that one. So I'm not directly involved, but this is what I know.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and I think we discussed the V2 format as default. I'll create a PR and then link it to the old discussion on the DAO list where we have kind of preliminary consensus on doing that change. So hopefully this will be in 3.4. And just to reiterate, for like some of the engines usually do not, like sometimes do not support the V2 format. But what that actually means is they don't support delete files. So they have to separate the notion of having delete files versus having a v2 table. There is nothing specific about the v2 format itself without those delete files. So it's no different than a v1 table, just better. Also, there would be more PRs for me around delete planning and column stats. So if you're interested, then I would value your feedback, because right now it takes a lot of time and resources to do the delete planning, because we spend a lot of time comparing min and max values, and usually that gives zero benefit in the use cases that I've seen so far. And so if, I will be doing some changes. If you have any interest in that, I would value the feedback. And the last change that I had to discuss is
can I just beg you to comment about the delete stuff? Because we've also been looking at some of the delete performance. Bryan Keller, I don't know if he's available to chat or to talk right now, but like we've also found some inefficiencies in terms of like how we load the delete files. Like many times they'll match multiple times, and you'll end up like loading them, potentially 10x times. And so there's some benefit if we can figure out how do we either cache those or reuse the actual delete so you don't have to load it so frequently.
This is also like one of the things that we noticed, where like, and that's basically at the executor level mostly. So that's been, I think we did it that way because it was this most like simple way to go for, but there was a lot of room for improvement. The changes that I was referring to is how you assign deletes. It's basically what happens on the driver when you plan it. So yeah, I'll be happy to chat more.
Yeah, I think overall, like there are a number of things that we're starting to notice in terms of the behaviors around delete. So we didn't notice the planning side inefficiencies, but we did see the task side inefficiencies. And so yeah, if we have something, I don't know if there's some way that we want to coordinate these efforts. It sounds like you may have also done some of the work for the task side if you're caching on the executor. Did you create a PR or anything for that, or is that just kind of an internal workaround right now?
Not yet. So I'll be creating one today, but for the planning side, for the executor, I have some thoughts, but no actual implementation or whatever. So it's nice that more people are looking into that, because like once you start running those in production, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. So Bryan, like I don't know, Bryan, if yours is in a state that you could at least like share something to see how we did it.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's pretty much just a hack. It's caching the delete files so they're not loaded multiple times. And so there needs to be a lot of thought put into how that would actually work in practice.
Yeah, I think like in my general thought there were like that technically what I envisioned is that once you get a task, you have like what we do right now is for every data file we have a list of delete files, and they may overlap. So essentially you need to reverse that equation. So you need to tell like for each delete file, this is a set, like you need to read this delete file for this set of data files or something like that. And then you read it once. And for vectorized reads, we build bitmaps of positions. So like what you could implement is you read a delete file and you have an in filter for the file names of the data files that you're looking for. And then you basically, whilst you stream it once, you populate the bitmaps for different files, and then you aggregate those bitmaps again and then pass it to the main reader. So that was my like high level thought there, but I would be interested to see what you guys did.
Yeah, I don't think ours was that smart currently. So yeah, it would be great to just collaborate on that and figure something out, because like the performance difference was quite significant. So
cool. Maybe like a simpler approach would just work just fine.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to touch on that briefly.
That makes sense. Yeah, and as I said, the final one is that there was some discussion about using Z standard by default. And then the open question right now is whether we make that change for existing tables that didn't set the codec as well, or we just try to do that for the newly created table. So if you have any feedback on this one, or you may be impacted, or you have like an opinion, just let us know in that PR. I think right now folks are inclined to just support new tables. But that's what I know about.
Yeah, the only issues that I'm aware of is there are still a few examples of engines that don't support Z standard. You know, I don't know what the current state of like the Hive integration is and whether they're on a version that actually knows how to decode Z standard with Parquet files. It, you know, that may be dependent on the actual Hive runtime version that they're using. And there have been a couple other recent ones like the, you know, Redshift made their announcement that they don't support Z standard currently. We're trying to get them to fix that. So there could be a few of these things where that becomes an unfortunate like speed bump, but I think we're also getting to a point where Z standard is common enough that we might just want to flip it and then just figure out what breaks and fix those things.
Do you mind like commenting on that PR was a list of like engines that you know that does not support? Because that was an open question, but nobody really like knew of an engine that doesn't support it.
Yeah, I wasn't really looking forward to going back and figuring out whether like which versions of Hive support it and don't. So we'll see.
Maybe ask some of the 5 folks as well to see where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it for myself.
I think making that move for the general population to default makes more sense, and then just giving a decent heads up for anybody who's still on the gzip. Okay, and Fako, did you want to talk about the last one?
Oh, actually, two of them. Yeah. So Rusty just pinged me about these two. So maybe Rusty, maybe you can talk about like
Go ahead, Rusty.
Sure. I've been working really hard on improving the speed at which we can read our manifest files in Python, because in various situations where I have a couple tens of thousands of data files, part of the table is kind of it was pretty slow to load all of those things. So what I've discovered through these experiments is that the Avro serialization is not quite using buffered binary writer. So we're not actually serializing the number of bytes that a particular map or list consists of. And the current Python client doesn't actually use the block count to skip it. But as I'm changing the Avro parser, I'd like to do lazy-based parsing of maps and lists based on when they're accessed. So what I'd like to do is deserialize it just as an array of bytes. And then once in Python someone decides to access that map or array, we deserialize it at runtime. So this can kind of let us avoid doing more work than we have to when we want to plan a scan. But looking at the Java code, it seems like we need to make a change to the Avro writer of these manifest files to use the buffered binary writer, so it calculates how many bytes that the map and list actually consume and then serializes them to the actual Avro output file. So that's the first item. And the second item, this all kind of flows into the second item. I've written a Python-based implementation of an Avro deserializer, which Fako has we've been kind of going back and forth, but this really decreases the parsing time for my test files up to like 95 or 96% of the time that we spend loading the file. If we just use Python to deserialize the integers, it really makes it much, much faster. But this means we'd likely want to have to start to publish Python binary wheels. And I think Fako has more to discuss about what implications that will have for our build process.
So I just a couple comments about the Avro. The Java implementation, of course, is probably the most predominant one, but it is also not, the only one. And so we need to make sure whatever the implementation is, it can handle whatever the representation of the Avro file is, as long as it's valid Avro. So I would say going and fixing Java to optimize the Python side is probably not the best approach.
Oh, we don't have to fix any of the Java. It's simply we need to use a different class that's already published in the Avro jar in Iceberg.
Yeah.
As far as I know, we do some sort of optimization for that sort in the Java library. So essentially, like we load I think we're talking about the stats, right? This is where the min-max values and
no, it's mostly even lower level than that. It's the actual writer that we're using to write Avro needs to be a different factory class. Like it needs to use a different, rather than direct binary writer, I think it's called buffered binary writer. So if we change that class name, this will allow us to write these second integers after lists and maps are serialized without having to make any real changes to Avro or anything else. But it will increase memory usage because we have to buffer the lists or maps in memory to calculate what their serialized size will be.
The only lists and maps we have right now is that of stats, right?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the same thing. It's actually like the performance on the read side comes from being able to, skip over some of the stats data, because that's really what's taking a lot of time on the Avro to deserialize is the stats data.
Yep.
What you're saying is like, hey, if we change how we write it out in Java, that makes it a lot easier to be able to like skip that information. But Anton, you were saying that like we do employ some sort of skipping on the Java read path.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand because what we do, I can tell you what we do in Java right now. You load that as byte buffer, I think, but you're not converting it to min-max values that you can work with unless they're being accessed.
That's what we'd like to do in Python.
Okay, I'm just like making sure that I understand, and that indeed has a lot of benefits because like if we were to deserialize it immediately, that would be really bad overall.
I think we're talking about two different things. I think the thing that Rusty is talking about is actually in the Avro spec. So what you can do before you start writing like a map, you can say like, okay, this map is like so many bytes long. But because it's in front of the map, we first need to buffer and we write like the whole map in like a separate buffer. We know like how big it is. We write that number, and then we actually write like the map. So what you can do then is, before you start deserializing the whole map, you can just skip over it, and once you access this map, you say, okay, let's now take this buffer that we still have in memory and just convert it to an Avro into your native Python objects. I think what you're saying is that we just keep we still deserialize the map, but we don't make for example, we don't convert the actual bytes to a string or to whatever.
Yeah, we'll need to double check. What's the read performance that we're talking about? Because like I've been playing around with profiling recently, and for me it takes like a second to read a manifest and like potentially with or without stats with 50,000 files, and then there that have a map of say at least 10 strings with min-max values.
Well, I think it depends. Like my data set's probably different than yours. I have about 225 columns, each of them with min-max stats on them, and I have about 1,000 data files. So we're having in Python that's 220 dictionaries, each with 80,000 dictionaries, each with 225 entries, and then we have the min value, the max value, the number of non-nulls. And it's a huge multiple of Python dictionaries that we can kind of avoid making until we actually need that data. And a lot of times the scan planner doesn't need the data at all.
Yeah, I would argue that it probably doesn't make sense to persist that like for that many columns, because rarely those are valuable. Because usually like if you like it's hard.
I mean, that's making presumptions of what the user will do, but everybody does crazy things.
Overall though, I don't think that there's probably too much pushback against, I would just open a PR to change the writer and we can validate hey, this isn't caused problems elsewhere, and it may just been an oversight in the very, initial implementation. And that may help the Java side too, especially if we can leverage the same kind of optimization. I think the bigger question, Rusty, is probably the Python implementation of this. That seems to net far more benefit than just this change alone.
Oh yes.
So what are the concerns about wheels versus pip packaging with I assume if you pip package it, it has to be compiled as you install it, and are you trying to avoid that? Is it
Well, I guess the thing we're trying to avoid is we can either require the users to have a working Python C compiler or C++ compiler in this case, or we can ship a binary where they don't need a compiler And that's much easier for people that are I just want to install it and not deal with building custom code. Or we have a third option of just staying in pure Python, but I think a lot of the user base will probably say that's not fast enough. We need something else.
Yeah, so I'm actually digging into this. I still have to give it an actual try. I think the trickiest part with like publishing wheels is that you have to compile it against many different architectures. And so I'm on the M1, but we also do it for Linux, right? And for Windows and all these kind of things. So there's actually like it's also being used by NumPy and by other big projects. Like it's just a container that runs on GitHub Actions. Test it against the architecture on which GitHub Action works. What you can do is then like build all the wheels. You can download them through a zip, and then we could do like the whole release process. But I have to check like if this is okay with like the standards of Apache, if it's okay to generate like these binaries on GitHub Actions. I saw like Flink doing it as well, but yeah, that's not really approved.
I think we do have some of the codec implementations in like Hadoop and things like that. So there's probably prior art out there. But yeah, ask Apache Infra team.
Okay. Yeah, that's also a possibility. Yeah. So my personal standpoint is I would like to have like this performance in there, but I think we should offer like these binary wheels, because otherwise I think people will get like this error like you don't have like a valid C compiler on your machine. And you can maybe fall back to a pure Python, but you have to set like a flag and do pip install. It's also not super user friendly. So I think for the major platforms we should at least like publish these wheels, and I think then for me at least we should be good to go.
Does that work seamlessly with the pip install, or is that like okay?
Yeah. It's just like installing pyarrow or whatever. You don't even notice it.
I think the final thing that's not quite on the agenda, I would revisit our use of multi-threading versus multi-processing stuff. If this code is much faster, we may be able to eliminate the need for thread pools and those types of things. But I guess like we'll leave it as a functional flag. But some users have kind of said, hey, I don't want to enable threads in this case. And sometimes like the contention around the threads is more than it's there's more benefit to not have the threading than having the threading there.
That's a good point, and there's also a PR out there that actually places like refactors like the multi-threading with also where you could just inject like another I think it's called executor, where you say like, okay, just single thread executor. Yeah. So that's actually a PR that's open. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, for the proposal to add the size for the map and list. Sorry, maybe it's a really dumb question, but like, is this just backward compatible? Like, if we read Avro files without that one, I just want to understand. Okay.
Yep. Avro serializes if it knows a number of blocks, it's a negative integer after the first block count of a map or a list. Mm-hmm. If that value is positive, you can disregard it and just serialize along the way using block counts.
Okay. That sounds awesome.
Do you mind, Rusty, creating like a PR for that change? It feels like
I'll send it in.
Low-hanging fruit that you can just do if it's backward compatible and just switch just to battery encoding.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send that in. I just didn't know if there was a different process to get it reviewed and in than the Python stuff.
Nope, same thing. Just make a PR.
All right. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks. I'm going to stop the recording now.